Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. Well, I think I have this Sanford Surface Grinder cleaned up as much as I want to take it at this point. So I want to start doing a little reassembly. Well, before I start putting it back together, I do want to get at least an idea of the condition of all of the way surfaces. So I'm going to start by inspecting the ways here in the base of the machine. I'll get them cleaned down with some Windex, and I'll blue up a straight edge and we'll take a look. Well, I've got some bluing compound, some Canode blue, on my 24-inch Camelback straight edge here, and we'll set it down on the ways and just give it a good rub back and forth. Well, this is about what I was expecting. I was expecting to see where in the work area of the surface grinder. So we'll check the other side here, and I expect it to be similar. Well, this is a little different than I expected. It doesn't quite mirror the opposing V. There's a little bit more bluing, some contact here in the middle. I was expecting to see more of a low spot here. Well, over here on the left side, there is some scoring on the front. Looks like something must have gotten up underneath it. Now, that won't necessarily affect the overall flatness, though, of the way. Well, it's interesting to see that there's a wider contact pattern, at least on this half of the V, and maybe that's similar to the other side where the inside of the V might be taking less of the wear than the outsides of the V-way. Well, if my theory holds true on this side, we should see a lot less contact pattern, and we do. It's mostly down in the bottom and the back. Interesting. I would have expected to see a slightly wider contact pattern. Let me try this again and see if maybe I just wasn't putting the right pressure on it. No, about the same. You know, the wear is in the middle of the way. There's some contact there at the bottom. Interesting. Next, I want to check the ways on the other side of the saddle. I'm using a stone here just to knock down any burrs that might be left over, especially in those oil grooves. Well, this is an interesting wear pattern, right? It's touching on the top and the bottom of the V-way, and if you can notice here on the part of the V that's closest to the bottom of the saddle, you can see some remnants of the flaking or scraping that would have been all across this entire V-way. So yeah, this has some significant wear in the ways. Well, you can really see it here on the other side of the saddleways, where you can see that scraping, which means that there's a lot of wear in the rest of it. So I'm not even going to bother bluing this side up because it's just going to show me that there's a big hollow point down the whole length of this V. Well, I've temporarily put the saddle on the base so I can blue up the ways on the top of the saddle. Yeah, and this is again what I would have expected. You can see on the front edge of the way there's some scraping marks that are showing up from the blue. I wasn't completely expecting the high spot to be in the center of the way, but I mean, yeah, there's a significant amount of wear here. On the rearward V of the back way, it's interesting to see that the high spot is actually in the center of that way. I would, again, expect it to be on the outside edges. I'll have to think about why this would wear more on the outside edges than in the center. I'm sure there's some reason for it. I'm just curious what it might be. I'm not sure exactly what to make of that rear V-way, why I'm not getting a lot of contact to begin with. Maybe I didn't have enough bluing on the straight edge, but it's kind of inconsequential at this point. Well, since I'm here, I might as well take a look at the underside of the table, and I would expect to see more wear in the center, which would mirror the top of the saddle. And yeah, you can even see some of the scraping marks on that outside edge and contact on the opposite edge. Very little in between. That's where all the wear is. And that rear V-way is pretty much the same. We're seeing the wear in the center and less wear on the outside edges and also at the very end of that V-way. So this may take some work to rebuild if I choose to go down that road. Well, I've got the saddle back over here on the workbench because I need to put the table traverse handle back in. And that means I'm going to have to put all these needle bearings back in. I was able to collect them all, so I think we're good there. Well, I'm going to start here by putting a little bit of grease up into the race of the bearing, and this is just to give the needles something to adhere to so they'll stay in place. I'll use a pair of tweezers here to add the needles back into the bearing race, and I can then use those to kind of rotate them around up the sides and just do this one by one until they're all back in place. While the needles are back in place, thankfully I didn't lose any, so I just need to slide the shaft in for the table traverse handle. I'm being very careful and gingerly here to make sure I don't knock any of those needles out of place. And then also, as it comes out the back of this bore, that I don't do anything to disturb the needles in the bearing back there. And this felt washer then goes on next on the back here, and I can reinstall that pinion. Well, it's about here I realized I made a mistake here. When I put the pinion back on the shaft, I didn't check to make sure that I could actually see the hole all the way through. And since these things are rarely drilled exactly from one side to the next in the center, it's slightly off-centered by probably about 60 thousandths. So now I have to figure out to get this roll pin back out so I can spin this gear around and then reinsert the roll pin. Well, without the camera on, I managed to get that roll pin back out, and now it's installed correctly. Well, the next thing I can do, I can lift this thing up onto its side, and I want to install the feed nut for the saddle lead screw. It's a little different than the way that I took it apart. I will thread in the lead screw later, but for now I want to loosely install this nut. Don't want to tighten it down. I just want to get it started. Well, before I put the saddle back on the base, I want to get the covers installed. Now I'm using a little bit of oil to lubricate them, and I'm not sure if this is the right thing to use here. I almost feel like these should go on dry, or maybe with something like graphite powder. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments what I should use to lubricate these. I'm not quite done putting this thing back together yet, so I will have some opportunities to take it apart. Again, it's actually fairly simple to take apart, so if I need to change this out, it's not the end of the world. Now, I couldn't find a lot of information on what kind of oil I should use on these ways, but it kind of made sense to me to use whey oil. So I'm using number 2 whey oil, same whey oil I would use on the lathe. Well, it feels pretty good, although that noise you're hearing is actually those covers, which again, I'm not sure what I should use to lubricate them, if anything. Maybe they should be dry, but they're kind of noisy. I'm using whey oil again here on the lead screw. This lead screw also needs to be replaced. It's in pretty worn shape in the middle, but this isn't, to me, as critical as the elevating screw, just because that's more of a precision dial, going up and down, right? Taking a little bit off. This is, just to move it in and out. Even though it's graduated, I don't think it's as critical. Well, I need to get this seated over the roll pins, so I'll just use a brass hammer here to gently drive it on over top of those roll pins. And then finally here, install the socket head cap screws. Well, with that feed screw installed, I can now safely tighten down the cap screws that hold the nut to the underside of the saddle. Well, it might sound a little crunchy because of those covers, but it does feel pretty good. It effortlessly moves back and forward with the hand wheel. So far, so good. Well, next up is the table. I need to get the rack reinstalled before I can put it back down on the saddle. Well, first, before I can put the rack on, I need to reinstall these shims. The yellow one seems to be okay, but the other plastic ones, the clear plastic ones, they got a little disorganized while they were sitting on the shelf waiting to go back on, and they got a little bit twisted, but it shouldn't affect them at all. I just need to be careful in getting it laid flat before I get the rack put on. I don't know if they're directional. I think all these holes should be the same, should be equidistant from each other. I just need to get all of them lined up and then try to get a screw started with the rack. I'll put a little bit of grease here on the rack because there's no way for oil to get to the pinion, so this seems to be the best option for lubrication. Well, again, I'll put a little bit of whey oil on the ways before I drop the saddle into place. Well, there's nothing that physically holds this table on the saddle except for gravity. So with it in place, the traverse handle seems to be working really nicely and moving the table back and forth very smoothly. Although I don't anticipate ever really needing this table stop function, I am going to go ahead and reinstall these rails on the front of the table. Well, the screws in the top rail are still kind of loose. I want to slide on the stop block with the T-nut and then I'll tighten them up. Well, that T-nut doesn't really want to slide in that rail very nicely. It's still kind of sticky. I want to loosen these screws here on the top rail again just to see if I can't figure out a way to enlarge that gap. Well, this isn't a precision slot, so here I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to use a screwdriver here to pry the slot a little bit wider and then tighten down the screw, and that should give me a little bit more clearance for the T-nut. Well, that moves through the slot a lot nicer, so at least if I do choose to use this function, at least I know I can. The other half of this stop block mechanism is this block here. It's got a spring-loaded plunger in it. It's keyed with a couple of roll pins. I need to tap those into place here with the brass hammer, and then I can attach it to the top of the saddle with a couple of socket head cap screws. Well, I still have more work to do on this table, but I'm going to take these T-nuts and the clamps and just slide them in here for safekeeping so they don't get lost. Because before I actually bring the mag chuck back down, I need to run a grinding wheel over the surface of the table so I know it's good and flat. It's just all the stuff that I'm going to need to do to get this set up and get it ready to at least see if it's going to be a usable machine. But all of that other stuff is going to have to wait for another weekend and another video. Well, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below. Those really help with the YouTube algorithm so that my videos get suggested to others that may not subscribe to the channel. If you are a subscriber, thank you very much. If you're not, consider hitting that subscribe button so you'll see when the next edition of this rehab comes out. And a special thanks to all those that support the channel on PayPal or Patreon. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.